Hello there, and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to try to make ourselves a little bit of a toxic base. This kind of base would be great for something like a Nurgle or an Underworld or any other kind of toxic monster that you can think of. So we're going to start off by using a texture tone, like the texture paint. These are just sort of ground down sandy sort of effects. For most of my basing I use a desert sand because it seems quite bright as a base. By the time you tone the colours back up, it goes quite, has quite a nice vibrance to it, has quite a nice depth to it. And what I tend to do when I'm basing in this sort of way is to just dab as much of that texture base on so that it creates a little bit of a random kind of element. I'm just going to plan out almost like a small stream here as well, which you can see me just working out a few zigzag and jagged lines. So dab the paintbrush on the base to create the texture of like the mud or the earth, and then just dragging that into like a small stream. Just kind of painting that area in, and when it dries up you'll see kind of how this effect works. It's quite simple, but it's very effective. And here we go, just dabbing everything to get it as we want. Like so. And there we go. What you might want to do then is just plan out where you're going to place some of your rocks and basing bits. I mean, I planned these out ahead, and I've got one or two large rocks here, just to create a little bit more of an interest, you know, things that are a little bit more interesting to look at when you base it, or when you base to be too plain. But at the same time, I do find the bases less can sometimes be more, so you don't want too much on the base to take away or detract from your miniature. And pretty much just super glue in a few rocks straight on top of this. Like I say, I've planned this out a little bit ahead of time, so I kind of know where the rocks are going to go before I'm placing the glue. It's always good to have an idea beforehand. Just pressing them down, making sure that they dry up as solid as possible. And for this base I'm also going to add a little bit of glue just in between the rocks, because I'm going to add a little skull in the middle there. I think I might have put a little bit too much glue down, but it doesn't matter. When you do place your skull, try your best not to drop it straight in the glue like I did, and then have to try to fish it out and get glue all over your fingers. So I'm going to do something just a little bit different here. This is some FIMO air basic sort of air drying clay, and that's all I'm doing is rolling this into like a sort of a shape where it's a little bit bulbous in the middle, and then a little bit sort of thinner on the edges. We're going to convert this into being like sort of maggots, and we'll paint them to be like maggots all shortly. Just want to twist them a little bit around your finger or thumb so that you get this little curved, bulbous effect. And I've done that for a couple. It's air drying clay, so if you leave it for an hour, this stuff does dry up quite well. And again, plan out where they go in, place your glue, and then glue your maggots on as well. Like I say, this toxic base, we want this to be pretty sick, we want it to be pretty gnarly, you know. So just be careful when you place in your maggots, you don't get glue all over your fingers. Now there's a sentence I never thought I'd hear myself say. And there we go. So once everything's dry, I've just primed this in a nice flat grey primer. And as you can see, we've got a few deeper recesses, a few nice areas sticking out the skull, some maggots, the rocks. Yeah, creating almost like a little wall in between, so this should go quite nice. So to start off with painting, now that we've built our base up, I'm going to start with a Vallejo flat brown, and then I'm just going to cover all of the muddy part all across the bottom of the base, trying to avoid the rocks and the skull and the maggots as much as possible, but we'll paint those a little later, so it doesn't matter if you get a little bit on them. That's the good thing with bases, is it can be very messy, and the more mess, the more fun. There you go. So once our brown is dry, we're going to move on to a Vallejo BONEWHITE. And this is for the skull and the maggots. We're going to paint these sort of the same sort of colours. It just gives us a little bit of a lighter pop on the base when we've got so much sort of dark brown as the normal sort of muddy effect. And I'll take a couple of layers with this with nice thin down paint. So again, just take your time. On the skull, and we're just moving on to the maggot here. Now it may seem a little bit strange that these little maggots, you could sort of use a knife, use your model knife or something like that to score little ridges and things like that into the maggots, but I wanted to try to make this as simple as possible. So instead of scoring anything or cutting into anything or creating anything like that, I'm going to paint the sort of the ridges and things in later, and you'll see that a little bit later. What you want to do now is just cover everything in like a nice dark brown wash. For this I'm using a Vallejo wash, but you could use anything like a soft tone from Army Painter, or even a Agrax Earthshade from Citadel, if that's your preferred paint company. And what I have got here is a Vallejo green wash. Now this one is very interesting because this green wash can be quite sickly. I've used this on a different video about painting sort of skin tones on zombies, and the green wash is very, very sickly. This is a really cool colour for things like toxic bases, because this paint actually dries quite chalky, but it also has quite a nice green vibrance to it as well. So this will add a really, really interesting effect to this kind of base. So just make sure to cover all of the mud with this as well. Like I say, we want this to be quite gnarly. We want this to be really sort of out there and horrible. So when we look at it at the end, this is quite sick. Now moving on to the rocks, I'm just going to cover these in a Citadel ESHIN grey. So this is a nice dark grey. If you're a Vallejo user on this, you know, you could use something like a German grey, something that's really, really dark, because with your base coats on the rocks, it's always good to have a dark, dark grey, and then we can lighten up from there. And once the rocks are dry, oh no, excuse me, we're going to move on to dry brushing the colour back up on the mud. So for this I'm using a Vallejo flat earth, not a fat earth, a flat earth. I can't speak today, I'm sorry. So you're going to use a flat earth on this. I'm just going to dry brush this lightly across all of the raised areas. This is going to allow the colour a little bit more to pop. So that green then is almost going to be in like small pools and puddles and things like that around the base, which should make it a bit more interesting. And for me, when it comes to dry brushing, I like to dry brush up 2 tones as well. So we're going to move on to a Vallejo again. This one's a KHAKI, and this one is a much lighter tone going on top. So this one is just going to be the overall edge highlight to the dry brushing, to the mud effect, I guess. Like I normally say with dry brushing, less is more. If you dry brush in a light stages, like patterns, if you need to add more, you can. But if you put too much on and you need to take it away, you can't. So just take your time with dry brushing and build it up slowly. Doesn't matter if you catch some of the rocks and things, because we're going to go over those anyway at a later stage and cover those with a dry brush if they're so don't worry too much about that. We're going to move on to a Citadel Carbolite green. Now this is an awesome green. It's one of my favourite greens for this kind of base. It has a sort of sheen and a glimmer to it that is really, really cool for things like toxicity in this sort of way. Pretty much where we planned and sort of painted in a little stream earlier, that's what we're going to do now. We're just painting this Carbolite green into where that stream was planned. And this will give us an effect that we've kind of got this sort of like sickly, toxic sludge, this putrid sort of slime flowing through the base, which is going to be really, really cool. Really sort of separate this base from like your normal earthy bases and earthy tone bases as well. So just continue to follow that little river. You can use like some of the little patterns, and it's where the texture paint has left like little gaps, and you can make these little pools in there as well, and you can connect them all together as well if you like. So yeah, have some fun with this stage. This is one of my favourite stages because the colour tone and the texture stands out off that brown so much that it really, really pulls your attention to the sort of slime, to the putrid waste that is flowing through your base. Again, not normally the kind of sentence you'd say in an everyday conversation. So there we go. As you see, I followed on through the base. What I'm going to do now is just use a Citadel again. This time we're using a moot green. It's a very, very, very bright green. It's almost like an luminous green. While the Carbolite green is still wet, I'm just going to dot and drag this around in a sort of uncontrolled mad plan, really, just to kind of create a little bit of a drag, so that those paints in some areas will blend together, and in other areas the moot green will look like it's stronger and sticking through. Almost as if what you've got is a two-tone effect. So it's like the moot green, the lighter green is sort of like laying on top of that Carbolite green, so it's creating a double texture, which will be great later. And from there we're going to just use a Citadel NULN oil, which is a black wash, just to cover over the stones and the rocks, so that tones them down a little bit more. So we started with a really dark grey base, now we put in a black wash over the top. And here we go, going back to the Vallejo BONEWHITE. Now this is where I was saying we were going to create the folds in these maggots rather than cut them in. We're going to paint them in. And what you just want to do is take your time and kind of create these lines. And you want to try to get them to go all the way down, all the way around the maggots, so covering the whole sort of rounded edge. And just leaving that little gap in between. Now, because this is hand painted, they're not going to be perfect, which is exactly what you want, because when it comes to painting things like these, if they are too exact and precise, it takes away some of the nature side of it. So having it a little bit more hand painted with mistakes and things, it creates a little bit more of a realism to it, creates a little bit more of an edge to your painting, creates a little bit more of an interesting thing to look at. I'm going to do the same, just cover the skull back over with the BONEWHITE as well. Highlight the back. skull along the someone that is end up having a really bad time in the putrid wastes by the looks of things. Like to dream up what kind of bad thing that happened to this poor soul. So once you've done the bone white, we're just going to add a little bit of pallid rich flesh as well. This is a little bit of a lighter tone, and this is almost like a highlighting line. So I'm just going to go back across and hit some of the highlighting areas, obviously with the skull up the top part of the skull, around the eye sockets, and the same with the maggots as well. This time, instead of going all the way around the maggots, you just kind of hit the top side of these maggots just to give them a little bit of a highlight on the top edge. There you go, just like that. And with the paint being thinned as well, this will blend in quite nicely. And there you go. So moving on to the rocks, as I said, we're going to dry brush. So we're going to dry brush first of all with a Citadel Dawnstone. This one is going to be used as a nice mid dry brush. Dawnstone is a very good medium grey, sort of middle of the road grey. I use this a lot for rocks. And then once you've got your Dawnstone, we're going to hit the very, very raised areas with Celestra grey. And again, that's from Citadel. And so it's just hitting the very tops of the edges, creating a little bit more of a highlight. Just and from there, I'm just going to add a single tuft of grass. So for this one, I'm using a winter tuft from the Armor Painter. And the reason being is because a winter tuft set always seems to look a little bit like dead grass, or grass that's been kind of weathered and affected by what's around it. So that'll add a little bit more character to this rather than having a bright green, lush looking plant. And that's all that's left then, is to just go around the base with a black. And you can use any black. I mean, I tend to use the brilliant black, but ABADOON black from CITADEL is fine. And this just polishes off and finishes off the base. Not just this base, but it's always good to do this on all the pictures as well. It's a good way of symbolising to yourself that you've completed your miniature and you've just completed the end with the blacks around. And there you go. This is what the bases look like. This is how they look on my Underworld team as well. So I've built up a very similar sort of pattern. Yeah, it's great. So thanks very much for watching, guys. As always, I hope that